Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of my random YouTube series of life, fitness, food type stories, events, however you want to describe it. So, today, I just finished up writing the article that goes right along with this, just like before. There's an article, there'll be a link below to CoreyGFitness.com. I think I'm a lot more proficient at writing than speaking, but I like to do both, and it kind of ties in with today's topic as well. So, today's topic is fearlessness versus courage. So this is a topic that hits home extremely hard for me. It's had a huge impact in my life, and it's affected everything that I do on a daily basis, and it's kind of led me to where I'm at right now, doing this video and building my own brand on social media and doing all the things that I do right now. It's crazy how much this applies to my life. So let's start out with defining fear. What is fear? What really is it? People kind of just say, I fear this, I fear that, but they don't really dig deep to define what fear really is, which I think helps kind of break through fear in general, which we'll get into. So, what is fear? Fear is something that we all create in our own heads. Everyone has fears. It's how you interact with those fears, though, that determines the type of life that you will live. So that's just my definition. Everyone's definitions may be a little bit different, but I think that's the best way to define fear. So, why does that matter, though? It matters because fear isn't real, necessarily. Fear is something that we create in our own heads, just like anything else in life. Nothing is inherently good or bad. I posted this on Instagram a few weeks ago. Nothing is inherently good or bad. We kind of put these tags on everything. We define things. This is good. This is bad. I like this. I don't like this. I fear this. I don't fear that. So let's really dig into to figuring out why we fear things, and then kind of figure out how to break through those fears and whatnot. So I'm going to quote a book called The War of Art a few times in this. Sorry. Just ate some walnuts. I'm trying to pick them out of my teeth. Still got it in there. The War of Art, though. This is a book. The author is Steven Pressfield. I've quoted a number of times on Snapchat, Instagram, yada, yada, yada. Hands down my favorite book of all time. Definitely check it out. Order on Amazon. Get it at Barnes & Noble. It's totally changed my life, and you'll see why here in a second. So I want to start out with a quote from The War of Art. And this is a quote that really, again, impacted my life. And when I read this quote, it changed a lot of things for me. And it changed the way I view a lot of things in life and how I go about my business on a daily basis. So here's the quote. Man, I forgot my water. Shit. Okay. Henry Fonda was still throwing up before each stage performance, even when he was 75 years old. In other words, fear doesn't go away. Doesn't matter if you know who Henry Fonda is or not. I don't really know who Henry Fonda is. I know the name. I think it was a really famous performer, probably like a musician, dancer type deal, one of those performers. But the point is, though, that even such a prolific performer, I know is an extremely famous person. I know that much. They still, at 75 years old, after years, probably 30, 40 plus years of performing at the highest level, they still had fear before they got on stage every single time. Dude was still puking before he went up on stage every single time. So that just goes to show that fear doesn't necessarily ever go away, right? This brings us back to the title of this article in this video: fearlessness versus courage. So what is fearlessness? What is courage? There's a huge difference between the two. So let's continue to get into this. In my opinion, it's all about how you perceive fear. In life, like I just said, nothing is inherently good or bad. In general, of course, there's things like murder and whatnot that aren't good, of course. But inherently, most things aren't good or bad. We put those tags on things. We create those in our own heads. So, fear seems to be an evolutionary trait that kept us alive in the past. It was obviously extremely beneficial in the past to keep us away from predators and unsafe situations. But in today's world, a lot of people don't think there's any kind of benefit or necessity for fear necessarily, right? I totally disagree. And this idea comes from The War of Art. It comes from listening to guys like Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, talk about the benefits of fear and how that can lead you to your calling in life. So, in today's world, it seems that fear can also be beneficial. Stephen Pressfield in The War of Art believes that fear is an indicator. It tells us what we have to do in order to evolve. So, he says, remember our rule of thumb. The more scared we are of our work or calling, the more sure we can be that we have to do it. So if you're, if you are extremely afraid of something, it's most likely because you know at the end of the day, that's what you should be doing with your life, right? That's your calling. And that's kind of what he's getting at here. And in my experiences and kind of what he talks about is that every time you push to the edges of your comfort zone, so look at it this way. Your fears are in your head again, right? And we have these boxes and these parameters set up in our brains and our heads. And it's kind of our comfort zone. It's where we like to live because we don't have to deal with any kind of fears or anxieties or discomfort in general. We're always trying to avoid discomfort. And I think that again comes from an evolutionary standpoint as well. The discomfort usually in the past would lead to the basically termination of your life, right? If you're uncomfortable, that probably means you're in a bad situation, but it doesn't necessarily apply to the life that we live in today's society and world. So when you push the edges, when you get out of that little box that you have set up in your head and you push the fringes and you try to expand that box more and more, that's when you quote unquote evolve or level up. So everyone's felt this, right? I know I've felt it personally a million different times. It's when you fear public speaking and you go up, you do it anyways, you suck it up, and when you get up there, you're like, man, this isn't nearly as bad as I thought it was gonna be, or it still sucks, but you know what I mean? Like in your brain, you probably thought it was life or death, because that's kind of what your brain tries to trick you into thinking. So usually when you do that, you realize, number one, it wasn't as bad as you thought it was gonna be, but number two, the confidence. The amount of confidence that you gain when you are afraid of something, when you're fearful of something, but you still attack it head on, you face it face to face. Once you get through that, it may be extremely uncomfortable in the moment. You may get up on stage. It may be just as bad as you thought it was going to be potentially, right? You have a panic attack. You freak the fuck out. But at the end of the day, once you get off stage, once you're back in your house, whatever, you're like, man, I'm so glad I did that, because now I have so much more confidence. I know that I can overcome anything that I initially thought that I couldn't do, or that I had this massive fear of. So it brings with it a ton of confidence, which going forward will allow you to attack other things that you have feared greatly and didn't think that you could actually overcome. So let's see what else I got here. Another quote, of course, I'm a big quote guy. Another quote from The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield kind of goes along with that. He says, so if you are paralyzed with fear, it's a good sign. It shows what you have to do in life. Again, it's kind of your North Star. It's your compass. It's pointing you towards where you need to be. So, my biggest thing here with this video, with this article, is essentially trying to convey the point across that no one is fearless. There's not a single person in this world that is totally fearless. And I fell into this trap as well. When you see people that are extremely successful in business, you see actors, you see all these extremely high-level people, you fall into this trap of thinking, well, they don't have fear. You know what I mean? Like, it was a lot easier for them to get to that place because they don't fear anything. Just kind of viewing them from the outside in, it doesn't seem like they have any fear. But at the end of the day, from my experiences being around a lot of high-level people like Corey G, Zach Hummel, Arnold, and learning from people through podcasts like Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, these extremely successful CEOs, I've come to find that no one is fearless. Everyone has fears, and I'll bring up some personal examples here in a second. But that's the biggest point here with this article, is that if you have fears, that's totally normal. Don't let that paralyze you. Don't let that completely stop you from doing what you want to do with your life. Because if you do, by the time you're 80, you're on your deathbed, you're gonna have a lot of regret. And Gary Vee talks about it all the time. That's the worst thing that you can do in life, is be on your deathbed and have a lot of regret. Though we control that, we can avoid having that regret on our deathbed. But when you're 80 years old, you can't do anything about it. There's not shit you can do. That's why I'm so big on it, and Gary Vee so big on living your life to avoid regret on your deathbed. So don't fall into the trap. Long story short, I get in a little rant. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're the only one that has fear. That's where we come back to the title of the article: fearlessness versus courageousness. There's a huge difference. Courageousness, in my in my definition, in my mind, is having that fear still, but going head on, facing it face to face like we just talked about, and not letting it paralyze you or stop you from doing what you want to do. That's what courageousness is. Fearlessness, there may be some weird motherfuckers, some anomalies out there that don't have any fears at all. But even Navy SEALs that are going out and battling, I've heard experiences from those guys, and they still have fears. They don't let that paralyze them. They don't let them stop them. They just go forth. They push the fringes of their little comfort zone, the box that they have in their head, and go forward. That is the difference between fearlessness and courageousness. Everyone has fear. And when I realized that, I read that excerpt from The War of Art about Henry Fonda, and I've been listening to all the other podcasts. This was a few years ago when I kind of started to really realize this. It had a massive impact on my life because I thought I was one of the few people that had all this crazy anxiety. I've been an anxious mess my entire life, right, since I was in elementary school. And when I realized that other people were the same way for the most part, maybe not on the same level, I think there's levels to it, it really opened me up and made me realize, okay, well, you got to stop being a bitch. The fear's there, the anxiety's there, but you got to attack it head on. So let me give you guys a couple of personal experiences from my life, which I think may help you out in your life as well, because you can kind of relate a little bit better. So, all right, I had to go get some water. My mouth is extremely dry. I'm back, though. So before we get into the personal experiences, I wanted to kind of cap off what we just talked about. So the number one key that we had just discussed was that everyone has fears, right? There's not a single person out there, well, maybe a few, that doesn't have fears. Everyone, for the most part, has fear. But at the same time, the number two key point here is that the fear never goes away. That's the lesson we learned with Henry Fonda, is that he overcame that fear initially, and that's why everyone knows him. That's why he's so successful and so well known in general. But at 75 years old, 30 probably plus years of doing the damn thing, he still had the fear. It may not have been as quite drastic, but the fear was still there. The fear is never going to go away. Don't think that you're going to get to a certain point in your life and not have any fear. You got to set that expectation, because if that's the way you're looking at life, then you're going to be very let down in 20 years when you still have fear. You got to realize that the fear is not going to go away. You're going to have fear. It's not going to go away, but you can figure out ways to cope with it and face it head on, like these very successful people have done, and has allowed them to get to the point where they're at now. So, excuse me. Again, I just ate lunch. I'm sorry. Deal with it. Personal experiences, though. So this is where it hits home very hard for me. I've been a very anxious person my entire life. I can remember back in elementary school, I think third, fourth grade, we had this class play. It was like one of the first class plays that I had. We had to get up in front of the class, not even by ourselves. It was with like the whole group. And man, whew. And I remember being terrified. I think it was fourth grade. I remember being terrified of getting up in front of the class and having to dance. I think we had to do some bullshit dance, which I hate. We had to talk a little bit, and we all had our own lines. Terrified. So as early as I can remember, as long as I can remember, I've been a very anxious person, very socially anxious, someone that worries all the time, brain's always racing, which led me to have a lot of other fears. You know what I mean? Like that leads into fears of like phone calls and being on video and all these different things, which are going to apply here in a second. So that was the earliest anxiety and type of fear that I can remember. And then throughout middle school, high school, I remember being an extremely socially anxious person, just the way I am. That's just the way I'm wired. Like, I can't be mad about it. You know what I mean? Like, what can you do? It's just the way I was wired. And for me, I always thought it was a disadvantage for the longest time until I started to come across this type of information and this way of looking at things in the War of Art with Aubrey Marcus podcast, Joe Rogan podcast, all of these people that I follow now, Gary Vee, Tim Ferriss. I began to realize that it's actually an advantage for me because it points to my true north. It points to exactly what I should be doing, which is what I'm doing right now. If I had never read those books, I would never be in front of you right now doing these videos because I still get anxious to do these videos, which again, I'll talk about in a second, but the fear never goes away. Fast forward to about 20 years old, maybe 19. I think I was about 19 years old, actually. I was a freshman in college, 18 or 19, and I was offered a job at Muscle Farm. This was the caveat, though. The job was basically to head up customer service with a guy named Brian, and I would be taking a bulk of the calls because this was really early on in Muscle Farm. They did not have a customer service department, so we were basically just starting it. The two of us, Corey was obviously overseeing it all, but Brian and I were the heads. He was higher up than I was. I was kind of the grunt work, a little bitch, and I had to take basically all the calls. So I was like, shit, you know what I mean? Like, I'm terrified of talking on the phone, especially all day, to strangers. And to make it worse, there was always going to be people in the office listening to me talk on the phone, which made it even worse. I don't know. I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate. Like, talking on the phone, it's not a big deal for me anymore. But even like when I was a kid and I would order pizza, I would go into a different room so people didn't hear me talk on the phone. I'm still kind of that way with video stuff. I don't like people being around when I'm doing video stuff. I'm a weird motherfucker. But anyways, I decided to say fuck it. I took that step forward. I took the job because I knew what a massive opportunity it was. Long story short, after a few months, I started to get a little bit more comfortable with the calls. I started to get a good feel for it. I improved tenfold my ability to help people throughout the process on the phone and kind of solve their problems and doing it in a way that wasn't going to piss them off. And you know what I mean? The customer service type deal. There's a lot that goes into it. But at the end of the day, the fear was still there. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months after I'd started doing the calls, I got to a point where I was doing 20 to 40 calls a day at Muscle Farm, and I would still get nervous every time the phone rang. I would still get that weird feeling in my stomach where it was like kind of like butterflies. So the fear never went away. So fast forward again, I started working out at 16 years old. You guys know the story for the most part. I started working out at 16 years old with Corey G, the old school gym crew. I was learning from these guys forever. Business-wise, mindset-wise, social media branding-wise, nutrition, training-wise, all these different things. I had a wealth of knowledge, I feel like, at 20, 21 years old because of the fortunes I had of training with these guys and learning from them and building a friendship and having them mentor me and become basically second dads, brothers. So let's fast forward to when I was 21 years old. I had all this knowledge. I've been in the game for a while. I learned so much from following Corey G build his brand. I learned so much in regards to training, nutrition, the mindset stuff. I felt like I had a ton of knowledge which I could help a lot of people with. But the biggest thing that stopped me from building going all in on my social media brand, so what I'm doing now with basically, so you guys follow my Instagram page, my YouTube, it's all business based. It's not a personal page necessarily. It is, but it's all business based. It's a brand. It's a personal brand. It's a fitness brand. And what stopped me for the longest time with beginning that process and going all in with building the brand was that I was afraid of the camera. I was afraid of this little thing right here, and that's what stopped me. So I came across, check out an article. I need to do a video on it as well. Check out the article I just wrote on CoreyGFitness.com if you remember. It's called The Stranded Island Question. I talk about this more in depth, the process of making the decision to go all in on my brand. But one day I just made the decision to go all in on the brand. And when I made that decision, I knew I was going to have to start getting on video. I knew I was going to have to start doing things I was not comfortable with. So I made the decision. It was actually, I was reading The War of Art, and I read this caption there talking about if you were the last person on earth, what would you still do? I knew it was fitness. It wasn't real estate. Again, read the article so you kind of understand a little bit more. But I made that commitment, and the next day I went to Best Buy. I bought a tripod so I could start doing video stuff. I had no idea what the fuck I was doing. I was just doing video stuff to do it, basically. Like, to me, it didn't matter the quality of the video stuff. It just mattered that I was doing it. I was in the game. I was facing my fears on a daily basis. So I began to overcome the fear. And then let's fast forward 6 months later. I've been doing video stuff pretty regularly. The fear was still there. Fast forward even further to today. I got a video guy. I've done a lot of video stuff the last year and a half. And I still get nervous to hop on camera. Like, before I started this, you guys can tell that I get a little anxious. Like, I lose my breath at times because I get so caught up. I get a whirlwind in my head, and I just, all these things I'm trying to say, and I sometimes forget to breathe. It is what it is, you know what I mean? So I still get anxious all the time, and been doing it probably 18 months. So, man, something in my throat. So to me, I'm assuming that fear is never going to go away, but I figured out ways to cope with it. You guys wouldn't see me right now if I hadn't figured out a way to cope with it and face it head on. Another example, if you guys follow my podcast, Zach Hummel and I's podcast, The Young and Hungry Firecast, check it out. If you don't, we have a lot of fun on there. We talk about mindset type stuff like this, fitness, nutrition, yada, yada, yada. Shameless plug. I would have never started the podcast if I had never started to begin overcoming these fears, because same thing as being on the phone, being on camera, a little bit less because it's just audio. But man, I remember when Zach asked me, he said, "Yo, do you want to do a podcast?" And I was like, "I do," but in my head, I didn't say this to him. I was like, "Man, I'm super nervous to do it." I think we pondered the idea. We kicked it around for like a couple weeks to a month, and then we finally said, "Fuck it, let's do it." I remember we hopped on the podcast, and first episode went pretty well, actually. Like, once I got into it, once we got the conversation rolling, I realized, okay, well, this isn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. So I faced that fear, and then fast forward, we're now episode 55. We're 55 episodes deep. We've been doing it for a year now, and before every show, I still get a little bit anxious to hop on the podcast. Not nearly as much as I did originally when I was on episode 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, but the point is I still get nervous. I still have that fear. I'm just courageous enough to overcome the fear. And something funny as well, kind of applying to what I said earlier with we fall into this trap of thinking that other people don't have the fears. The great Zach Hummel Power told me, and he said it on the podcast as well, actually, was that before we did the first few episodes, he was actually extremely nervous as well, which you see him on camera. He's one of the most comfortable people you'll see on camera. He's got it. He's got that it factor. He was nervous to do the podcast. We both were like, what if we stumble over our words? What if we say something incorrectly? People think we're stupid, yada, yada, yada. We both had that feeling, which I would have never thought Zach Hummel had that nervousness, but he did. That just goes to show you, and that made me feel a lot more comfortable, and I think it made a lot of our listeners feel comfortable as well with their fears and kind of made them realize, okay, everyone has fears, and that's what I'm trying to do here. That's kind of bringing everything full circle. That's what I'm trying to do with this video is let you guys know that your fears are totally normal, but if you let those paralyze you, if you let those fears beat you, it's going to decide the type of life you live. You must decide the type of life you live. Like, if you let those fears decide, you're going to be on your deathbed at 80 years old, and you'll be like, fuck, man, fuck. I didn't do what I wanted to do. And it was because of these things that we created in our own head that stopped you from living the life that you wanted to live. We get one fucking life, and you're going to let that thing that you created in your own head stop you. Like, what? Are you kidding me? Another book you guys need to check out is called The Untethered Soul. He talks about, I was just listening to this chapter, and he was saying, step back and think of it this way. We are on this random ball flying through a random infinity abyss of blackness, and we're stressing over these little things we create in our own little brains. Are you kidding me? Like, that doesn't make any sense when you really step back and have that perspective. So those are my personal experiences, though. Again, I think you guys can kind of relate to those. If I had never taken that initial step to go to Best Buy, get that tripod, I would not be doing what I'm doing now. As of right now, full time I'm working out. Working out is my 9-to-5 job, essentially, because working out builds my social media brand, which my social media brand builds my one-on-one coaching business, which is what I do full time right now. The one-on-one coaching stuff fuels everything. Like, I got a brand new house right now. It's paying all these bills. It just fuels my lifestyle. And now I'm beginning to build another business, which is a clothing line. And that is directly tied to my social media brand. So everything comes back to overcoming this initial fear and taking that step, that courageous step, and saying fuck the fear and just doing it. So that's what I wanted to leave you guys with. Everyone's got fear. You probably have a lot of fears, as do I, as does everyone else. So if you guys want to hit me up, I'm very interested to kind of hear what your fears are in specific. Email me, jazzletinefitness@gmail.com. Let me know what kind of fears you have right now. Let me know your personal experiences. If there's anything you're struggling to overcome, or if there's anything that you have overcome and it's totally changed your life, let me know. Snapchat me and let me know as well if you want to do that. My Snapchat's JAY__Azeltine. So until next time, I will keep continuing to bring the mindset type videos, the fitness videos, the nutrition videos, everything in between. Like my channel, or like the video, subscribe to the channel. I hate doing these little plugs. Leave a comment if you like the video. Till next time, much love. Peace.